But the most important pillars of nutrition for the majority of women with PCOS is going to be increasing your overall protein intake, finding a nice balance between carbohydrates, fats, but then prioritizing complex carbohydrates over simple sugars.
Welcome everybody to a new episode with Astrid, your APD, your dietitian with T, no C, and I'm really excited today because I am going to be joined by Drew Baird, who is incredibly amazing when it comes to talking about PCOS, supplementation, and advocating for women, which is awesome to see more males raising up to talk about the issues women struggle and not just talk about it, but understand it and advocate for it. So I'm going to wait until he joins me. But in the meantime, make sure you ask any questions if you have any doubts about PCOS or anything specific you want to talk about. Just pop them in the comments below. I'm going to get him to join me. This is Started. Hello, how are you, Drew?
I am very, very well this morning. How are you?
I'm super excited to talk to you and see you. How's everything been on your end?
Very busy. I just got back from Sydney, so I was down in Sydney for a couple of days. Very busy. I launched a second company last year, so running the two companies, trying to learn and educate myself. So very busy, but that's kind of the way you want your life, right?
I agree. That's awesome. Well, I was introducing you, and I think there's so interesting, and I think we did a podcast about a year and a half ago, and I really wanted just to bring you back because there's so many people, especially in my audience, that really look up to understand better what the science says about PCOS.
Yep.
And there's more women awakening to the reality that there's more evidence now than before, and there's more research trying to investigate what is going on with women that struggle with PCOS. But if you go back in time and look at PCOS when it was first named, what would you rename it? What would the name be? Or what would you put it even instead of PCOS, and why?
Yeah, it's very interesting because there was a study released late last year looking into this, right? And I shared that on my Instagram, and I got an interesting response because the term Polycystic Ovary Syndrome doesn't necessarily sum up what the condition is. So polycystic ovaries are a symptom of PCOS, but they're not a contributing factor of PCOS. So why would you name a condition after a symptom? And, PCOS is a condition, right? It can create a vast array of symptoms. So I just think early on when they were looking and investigating, and PCOS was first recognized like over 100 years ago. It was named like far later than that. But in terms of what you would call it, the issue with PCOS is there's not one set pathophysiology. It's not going to be the same for all women. So it is hard to find a term that collectively sums it up perfectly for all. So where we are now, look, it probably makes sense to keep the name as it is, Polycystic Ovary Syndrome, because we know what it is, but we also understand that that doesn't necessarily perfectly sum up what it is, because many women with PCOS don't have polycystic ovaries. Many doctors, let's be honest, truly don't understand PCOS. I was having a chat with one of my doctors maybe 3 or 4 months ago. She's been, a GP for 20, 30 years. She worked for Roche Pharmaceuticals for 20 years. And she was explaining how in her studies to become a doctor, she learned about PCOS maybe it was like 20 minutes in her whole study for PCOS. So she went on to learn more about PCOS, but your general practitioner maybe hasn't been given a huge amount of education for PCOS, which is interesting because it is a medical condition. So you should be seeing your doctor first. But I would say, look, for simple sake, keep it polycystic ovarian syndrome, but we need to do better education around what it is, what symptoms are involved. And I think that's the way forward instead of coming up with an entirely new name, because imagine the millions of women around the world who do have PCOS that now have something different. So I think keep the name as it is, but we simply need better education around what it is, why it is, and then treatments.
So do you think if the name that was kind of like influenced by doctors and their approach to this treatment, do you think if PCOS had been named differently from the very beginning, would medical care maybe look different today?
Yeah, look, it's probably impossible to say because, myself, I'm not a doctor, so I never went through the qualifications to become a doctor, so I didn't learn what they teach to become PCOS. But again, look, and this is anecdotal, right? But I speak to thousands of women with PCOS, and I speak, one of the things I enjoy speaking to them is, what was the diagnosis process like? When did you first see PCOS symptoms? When did you first go see a doctor? What was that process like? And let's be honest, look, the medical industry is amazing. Thank God we have it. Most doctors are amazing, but if we're just talking about PCOS, there is just so much misunderstanding from doctors. So how much comes down to the term? Yeah, probably a lot, because as we said, like polycystic ovary syndrome makes you believe that polycystic ovaries would be the main feature, where it's not. And that's the thing too. The underlying triggers that are really responsible for the vast majority of PCOS symptoms. So we're looking at insulin resistance. We're looking at elevated levels of androgens. We're looking at elevated levels of cortisol. We're looking at disrupted menstrual cycle, so disrupted estrogen and progesterone, and then all of the downstream symptoms of that. So yeah, look, it's impossible to say, but I feel like, from my experience working in this field for the last 10 years, there is a severe lack of education and understanding, and that comes from the top down. It comes from how much research is being done. It comes down to what doctors are being taught. And then obviously when you go to your doctor, they're the expert. You listen to what they say. So if they've been taught incorrectly about PCOS, the amount of misinformation that women with PCOS receive is, quite frankly, due to how many women with PCOS are, is outrageous and quite upsetting.
I really feel like it is it's very slow. The process is very slow to understand the full process of how women struggle with PCOS and like what can we do about it.
Yep.
And I think it is hard to diagnose, but I don't think it is sometimes the right approach taken by doctors when they want to run a huge panel of tests and put you on anti-inflammatory diet for 3 weeks and get you on extreme diet of protein and eliminating lots of different things because they want to sort of test for autoimmune disease or and there's plenty of different things that they want to look into, when sometimes the answer is a little bit more simpler. What can we do at the level of the foundations of the basics that we can just see where the issue may be? So if you look at the different type of PCOS in your experience working on this field for quite a while, what is usually the biggest symptoms and the biggest types of PCOS that you seem to encounter the most?
So I'll give you a case study, which will sum up a lot of women with PCOS experience. So let's say they get to 13, 14, 15, and they start to realize that their cycle isn't becoming regular, which is common at that age anyway. It takes time for your brain and your ovaries to talk and sync correctly. But let's say you're 13, 14, 15. I've spoken to a lady from Germany who was diagnosed with PCOS at 9, which is extremely early. But let's say you're 15, your menstrual cycle is not becoming regular. You go to your doctor and your doctor diagnoses you with PCOS. So how do they diagnose PCOS? They're looking at 3 criteria. They're looking at regular periods. So generally, if you've had less than 8 periods in the last 12 months, that's a tick. Then they're looking at 2 other things. They're looking at polycystic ovaries on an ultrasound, and then they're looking at either blood tests or physical symptoms of high androgens. Physical symptoms of high androgens might be facial hair, it might be acne, it might be hair loss. So if you can tick 2 out of those 3, you could be diagnosed with PCOS. So if you're a 16-year-old girl and you have acne and your menstrual cycle isn't irregular, you could be diagnosed with PCOS. Most 16-year-old boys and girls have acne, and a lot of teenage girls at that age don't have a regular menstrual cycle. But this is the thing, right? They've looked at your menstrual cycle, which is just how many periods have you had? So it could be a simple question. We're looking at maybe you have acne on your face, and maybe they haven't even done an ultrasound. So they haven't investigated anything at all. The issue with that is then if you do have PCOS, let's say you're late teens, you move into your 20s, you move into your 30s, and you're struggling with these symptoms of PCOS, you haven't been told how your PCOS works at all. That's like me getting on my whiteboard right now and asking you, what's 5 plus blank? And asking you what the answer is. You can't give me the answer because you don't know the equation. And that's where a lot of women with PCOS are struggling now, because they were diagnosed at 16, 17, 18, 19, told they had PCOS. And at the moment, they're still being told either go on birth control or go and lose weight and come back when you want to have a child, right? And most girls at 16, 17, 18, 19 don't want to have a child. So it's not a big thing until they reach their 20s or 30s, unless they're also experiencing all of the other symptoms of PCOS. So what are some of the most common symptoms of PCOS? So we're looking at symptoms of high androgens, which could be hirsutism, which is facial hair. It could be acne. It could be hair loss. It could be irritability, anxiety, depression. We're looking at most commonly, the most common underlying driver, and I'll explain this in a second, is insulin resistance. So let's look at some of the symptoms that come from insulin resistance. We're looking at fatigue. We're looking at impacted sleep quality. We're looking at an environment where gaining weight becomes far more easier. We're looking at dysregulated appetite. So appetite increases, cravings increase. So when you're in your 20s or 30s and you have PCOS and you're dealing with weight gain, you're dealing with facial hair, you're dealing with chronic fatigue, you're dealing with, you're moody, you're irritable, you're not having a menstrual cycle, but you haven't been given any answers at all, right? And that's the thing about our medical system. Again, I love the medical system, but like anything humans create, it's not perfect. I know. You go to your doctor doesn't have time to sit there for 4 hours and explain PCOS to you. Your doctor has 80 other patients he or she has to see that day. So he or she wants to get you in here, diagnose you, medicate you, and send you on your way. Right. For other conditions, that's amazing. For PCOS, it's not amazing. So the most common underlying driver or types of PCOS, and when we say types of PCOS, we do have to be careful because types of PCOS you see and hear about on social media aren't medically recognized. So if you go to your doctor and say, can you please tell me what type of PCOS I have? Your doctor's going to look at you and say, there are no types of PCOS. But when social media and speaks about types of PCOS, we're talking about underlying drivers of PCOS. What's at the core heart of your symptoms? So for the majority of women with PCOS, it's going to be insulin resistance. So insulin resistance is an underlying condition where the cells of your body start to become resistant to insulin, which leads to high blood sugar. It leads to high insulin. And that has a downstream effect, again, of it impacts your sleep quality. It impacts your fatigue, impacts your menstrual cycle. So that can lead to irregular menses. It also in PCOS, all right, not in all women, but in PCOS, high insulin also leads to high androgens. High androgens, again, facial hair, hair loss, acne. So for the majority of women with PCOS, the two hallmark hormonal imbalances, and if you're really looking at what's a holistic and functional treatment plan for myself that I can incorporate on a day-to-day basis, if that holistic plan, instead of just I have to lose weight, a far more effective plan, and weight loss can help, but a far more effective plan, instead of just lose weight, eat less calories, I'm going to do a whole bunch of exercise, would be I'm looking to improve my insulin sensitivity and I'm looking to reduce my androgen levels. Also, chronic inflammation plays a role, but that's the big issue. The big issue is women are being diagnosed with PCOS. They're not being given any real answers at all. So then they're dealing with these symptoms, which is having a huge impact on their physical health, their mental health, their emotional health. And then the medical industry just it doesn't have an answer at the moment. As I said, doctors like to medicate you or advise you to go get surgery. For PCOS, the most effective treatment plan is a holistic treatment plan. Largely, we're looking at nutrition, we're looking at exercise, we're looking at stress management, we're looking at smart supplementation, where doctors just aren't perfect at that. But that's why you should be working with qualified dietitians, clinical nutritionists, and that is the best way to get wonderful results, because PCOS is a condition that when you have it and you haven't been given any answers, it's very easy to feel hopeless and to feel like there's no way I can improve this. What I want everyone to understand is there are so many things you can do to improve it. The most important thing, though, is understanding that and knowing that gives you hope, and then finding what works for you as an individual.
So if we look at the treatments and the way to improve PCOS, you mentioned core pillars that are important to address individually, but at the same time as a whole. So we have nutrition, we have exercise, supplementation, mindset, and then all the things that have to do with stress management and chronic inflammation and recovery. So if we had to address each one of those, if we think about what are the main things that are needed to be prioritized in the nutrition aspect, we know that a lot of women don't eat enough protein or enough fiber throughout the day. What else do you think is missing in the nutritional aspect in these patients?
So it's really interesting, and now I have really good insight into this because I started working with women with PCOS as a personal trainer. You know, I didn't have any grand schemes of this, but in 2014, I was working as a personal trainer, started working with a number of women with PCOS, and I saw firsthand their inability to lose weight at the rate of everyone else. Now, that's not anything to do with, there's something, in PCOS itself. It's due to the fact that, as we said, PCOS increases your appetite, increases your cravings. So let's look at losing weight specifically, right? Just quickly, because losing weight is part of it for many. To lose weight successfully, you want it to be in a sustained calorie deficit. You also want to be ideally exercising on a regular basis and practicing continual progression, which means you want to be pushing yourself. And you also need to be recovering, which is nutrition, but it's also sleep. So the biggest factors there are controlling your appetite, pushing yourself in exercise, and recovering through your sleep. But let's look at the most common symptoms of PCOS. Increased appetite, increased cravings, constant daytime fatigue, and significantly reduced sleep quality. So that's where so many women with PCOS struggle to lose weight, because the habitual behaviors you have to do on a daily basis becomes far more challenging. And I think the fitness industry doesn't understand that, especially most personal trainers. They just think PCOS doesn't impact things, hormones don't matter, you're just being lazy. It's not that at all. It's that, I like to look at it like a 100-meter running race. It's like, there's 8 people on the line, but, a woman with PCOS has her legs tied together. right? So she can still run and she can still get to the 100 meters, but she's not going to get there as fast as everyone else, right? So how do we untie that for her? And that's what you just said. So with nutrition, and I see this now. So last year we launched a coaching business. So part of that is questionnaire. We can see, they have to tell us what they eat on a daily basis, right? So they're struggling with fatigue. They're struggling with increased hunger. They're struggling with cravings. So we see what their diet is currently. So severe deficiency in protein, overeating of carbohydrates, because when you're hungry and craving, that's what your body goes to. And our societies now is all about hyperpalatable foods. So calorie dense foods, nutrient deficient foods, severe lack of undereating of protein. So that's the biggest issue. So in terms of changing that around, and changing that around can be very difficult, especially if you've been, struggling with your PCOS for 2, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. But the most important pillars of nutrition for the majority of women with PCOS is going to be increasing your overall protein intake, finding a nice balance between carbohydrates, fats, but then prioritizing complex carbohydrates over simple sugars. And that's the thing, right? We don't want to overcomplicate these things. You would know, like when you're giving someone, their initial plan and they're not into fitness, they haven't been training for the last 10 years. You can't take them from A to Z immediately. You want to take them from A to B. So keep it very simple. So with your nutrition, if you have PCOS and you're struggling and you want to change things around, you want to do it for yourself. If there are like two keystone habits that will lead to other habits, number one, set a protein goal. That is probably like the biggest thing, because that also helps with hunger, helps with appetite. It's also going to help with your other macronutrients, because if you're eating lots of protein, you are going to start eating less, carbohydrates, fats. But set a protein goal, and then prioritize complex carbohydrates, and that will, that alone can be absolutely life-changing.
I agree, because definitely protein is very underrated, especially for women around PCOS and even in the midlife transition, when we think about how much protein can you actually eat. And a lot of women struggle with this.
Yeah.
And I love this idea of making that a priority. So make your diet surrounded or based on the foundational point of protein first, and plan your meals around the protein.
Yeah.
Instead of doing the other way around. And the other thing that I feel it should be like a second stepping stone, you mentioned complex carbohydrates, and a really nice idea or way to somehow make you eat more complex carbohydrates and higher fiber is probably just to even start tracking your fiber. If you start tracking your fiber intake and you have a set goal of no less than 20 grams as a minimum, I would recommend to have 25 to 35 grams of fiber a day from different sources, from vegetables, nutritious, carbohydrates, but also fruit. Like if you can take a little bit of from everything, you get a nice combination of soluble and insoluble fiber, which is great for different functions that are going to benefit your body. So I think just forcing yourself to track fiber can help you in an indirect way to increase that carbohydrate quality intake. Now, you mentioned something interesting around the transition of someone who has never dieted or has been eating quite a lot of carbohydrates, and then we kind of need to meet them in the middle.
Yeah.
When this process happens, what do you think is the biggest struggle for them to do that transition? Because when we hear the social media statements is that you have to go and follow these trendy diets. You have to completely eliminate sugar. All sugar is bad for you. there are good foods, there are bad foods. Don't even touch that food. Go to keto and do keto, or eliminate all carbohydrates. Go vegan.
Yeah.
Eliminate this, eliminate that, and then you end up having no options, and it becomes so extreme that then it becomes unsustainable, and then we fall into eating disorders. So what is the middle? What is a happy middle for anyone that wants to transition from very, very, very no dieted ever? I have PCOS. I'm struggling with insulin resistance potentially, or high androgens. Now I want to feel better. I want to improve. What is that middle?
So very good question. I'm just going to write down these two things, middle, because I want to start with social media. The social media is both wonderful and not so wonderful, right? So the thing about social media, you would know as a creator, the people with the biggest followings are generally like the loudest. If you're just giving plain advice, it doesn't stand out. The people who stand out are the people saying extremes, right? If I come out and say, find what works for you is the most important thing. Change a few little things. That's not sexy. That's not going to stand out. But if I came out and said, every woman with PCOS has to go vegetarian, vegetarian's the way. The thing with that is it's new, it's shiny, right? People love shiny things. And then you're going to create a tribe. Some people, everyone's going to try it. For some people, it's going to be life-changing, and they're going to be in the comments saying, it's amazing. Other people are going to try it, and it doesn't work for them. That's the issue with social media. It's wonderful, but you have to filter through and find creators that make sense to you, right? Because all creators, myself included, you're always trying to go as viral as possible. And the easiest way to go as viral as possible is to say outlandish things, right? And in terms of what is the middle, and again, this is going to be an unsexy answer, but it is the correct answer. It's going to be different for everyone. It's going to be on an individual basis. So it's going to be, and the best thing to do, and I know a lot of people don't enjoy doing this, but it's one of the most important tools you could have in your toolkit for your own health, is track what you're eating now. See where you are now. I did this for myself. In our Facebook group, one of my coaches was showing her step tracker, and she did like 13,000 steps for the day. And I'm thinking, I wonder how many steps I do. I have no idea. So I went out and bought a step tracker watch, this little one here. Do you know how many steps do you think I was doing on a normal basis?
I don't know. 7,000?
No, like 4,000. Just got to 4,000, right? And that's big. I go to the gym every day. I was still only getting 4,000 steps. And that's because I work from home. I get in my car. I drive to the gym. I go to the gym. I do 10 sets on a machine, and then I sit there on my phone. I do 10 sets on the machine. I sit there on my phone. You're actually not that active. I get back in my car. I drive home. That awareness, I did that for the first 2 days, 4,053 steps, 4,200 steps. When I became aware of that, I started going for a walk once an hour, just a little walk around my backyard, right? Within 3 days, I went from 4,000 to 10,000, right? So the thing with most of us is we're not acutely aware, we're never looking in the mirror. So how to meet in the middle is track what your normal diet is to start with, and just see, right? Even download, MyFitnessPal, and just track. This is what I'm eating. And the beautiful thing about things like MyFitnessPal is it will tell you how many calories you're eating, how much protein you're eating, carbs, fats. And I would dare say most people would be shocked at how many calories they're eating and how little protein they're eating. So when you just become aware of that, then meeting in the middle could be as simple as, okay, I'm only eating 50 grams of protein. How do I get that to 75? Right? What do I need to do? I'll just look at my breakfast. Even if it's just breakfast, all right, I'm just going to change my breakfast for the first week. Or you might want to change everything. But the thing about changing your entire lifestyle is that humans are creatures of habit, right? There is habit loops on our brain. We like habitual behavior because it means our brain has to work less. We're just, we're robots on repeat. So become aware, start tracking what you're eating on a daily basis, and then, and it's going to be, I'm saying, like, start with just protein, start with complex carbs, which is also going to help your fiber intake. But if you can just say, all right, I'm eating 50 grams of protein. How do I get that to 75? I'm just going to change my breakfast and then stack those habits. Maybe I'm going to get to 100 grams of protein. Maybe I'm going to get to 25 grams of fiber. Like, that is how you truly create change, because it's less overwhelming. And what most people try and do is they take their current lifestyle, which you've been doing for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they change everything, because you get to a point where you're so unhappy that you're saying, I'm going to make change. So you want to change everything all at once because you want results all at once. But what generally happens is when you try and change everything all at once, you might be good for a week or 2 weeks, but slowly and surely those old habits are going to creep back in. When motivation starts to drop, it's kind of like, at the start, you're standing right next to the fire and it's hot. So you're motivated. But every single day, it's like you're taking a step away from the fire. And eventually, you're going to be cold again and you revert back to your old ways. The easiest way to do that is slowly but surely have your goal, know exactly what your outcome is. Okay, my outcome is going to be this amount of protein, this amount of calories for the day, and this amount of fiber. All right, I'm just going to slowly work the way up there. That becomes manageable. And then after that, you can set new goals and new goals. And it's a far more effective plan for most. Now, not everyone's wired like that. Some people are going to change everything in a day, get amazing results, and that's going to keep the fire burning. But from what I've seen, especially in women with PCOS, just a far more effective approach for the majority is changing things slowly, getting some support around you, whether that's through a Facebook group, whether that's through just following the right people on social media, and then stack those habits over time.
I totally agree with you. I think it is really important to think about how to meet someone in the middle, and self-awareness is such a huge, powerful tool.
Yeah.
Because it can just let you know where you're at, what your baseline is, and move from that baseline to what is the next best thing that we can do. Let's just step it up just a smidge, just a tiny bit, and see how you feel. And then obviously maybe that's not your optimal just yet, but it's just one step forward, one thing that you were doing better. So that could be, as you mentioned, just making a small change in one of your main meals. Maybe it's just changing the way you're eating on a daily basis, or if you're eating erratically, let's just fix that to make things a bit more consistent. And one of the things that I find that is really hard for a lot of women with PCOS is how to manage the nutritious diet with the cravings and the sweet tooth that they are having a struggle on a day-to-day basis. It doesn't mean that they have to completely eliminate sugar or sweet things. And nowadays we have such a wide range of options that can satisfy your sweet tooth without needing to necessarily eat sugar. But what is your stance on how to address these? And when it comes to the noise around artificial sweeteners and using other tools to manage your cravings?
Yeah, I would say just don't give in to cravings. It's all about willpower, right? That's most of the advice out there. No, look, again, when we're talking about PCOS, like, cravings are a real thing. This is driven by your biology. It's driven by insulin resistance. So those cells of your body aren't getting the nutrients they need. So they're sending signals to your brain like, we need nutrients as fast as possible. Let's prioritize simple sugars. So and through my experience, so many women with PCOS struggle with intense sugar cravings. or savory cravings. So how do we go about it? The easiest way to do it is, instead of just thinking, well, I'm just going to use willpower and overcome these cravings, why not just choose a slightly healthier option? And as you said just then, like, if you love ice cream, maybe look at one of those high protein ice creams that are out now. It's not perfect, but it's just a stepping stone. You know, for me, one thing that I love and one thing that works amazing for our clients. So our clients struggle a lot with like nighttime cravings when he's sitting there watching TV. 0% fat-free yogurt, scoop of protein powder, a little bit of honey, and some cinnamon. Cinnamon itself has amazing properties for PCOS, improving insulin sensitivity. Like that, like if you mix those four ingredients together, it tastes like vanilla mousse, like vanilla protein powder. It tastes amazing. Like that is an amazing way. So like for me, the easiest way to do it is, because that can really, cravings can sabotage like a healthy eating meal plan, because we got to talk too about the emotional impact, right? So a lot of women with PCOS deal with, binge eating. And for us as humans, and I think especially for women, like you have to be aware of your emotional health as well and your emotional state. So if you're living with PCOS and you're dealing with these symptoms and, it's impacting your self-esteem and it's impacting your confidence, a lot of us turn to food. Right. So if you're that person, you're turning to food, you might be trying to eat well and you truly want change, but that habitual behavior of at night time, I'm having a sweet tooth. I know, won't obviously name names, but I know some women who are eating like a whole bucket of whole bucket of ice cream every single night. And they wanted everything, like, of course they want to change that. And the issue is when they eat that, they feel so guilty. And then you feel shit about yourself. Then you go to bed not feeling happy. And then that just repeats. If you feel like you've, ruined your diet, you wake up the next morning, you're not even going to try and follow your diet, right? You've just given up again. So an easier way to do that is find like a healthier option. As I said, I love like that combination of like a protein powder with some Greek yogurt. So just a far more effective strategy again is, instead of just thinking I got to use willpower and I can't eat, because I've been told that these foods are good, these foods are bad, I can't eat ice cream. That's bullshit, right? Find what works for you. If going from A to B to C is going to be far more effective to getting you to Z in the end, do that. Like, stop listening to people that, they don't have cravings, so they just think you're weak for having cravings. Understand that I'm doing this for me. What's going to work for me? Understand that I'm still going to experience cravings even though I'm on a health kick, but what's a healthier alternative? Because then you're going to wake up the next morning, you're not going to feel guilty, you're still going to feel motivated, you're going to feel energized, you're going to eat well, you're going to do your workout, you're going to, continue that on, and that every little step counts.
I agree with you. It's so interesting how you can transform several snacks and several meals that you currently have that are not necessarily the best selections, to just modifying certain ingredients that will allow you to have relatively the same experience, but it's just going to be a much lower calorie, higher protein, much better option. And I would say the availability of nutrient dense, more friendlier snacks nowadays is much better than before. Before there was no options. There was no idea of how to swap something that was completely super high sugar to something that could still taste amazing, but has none of those ingredients that could not be that supportive to your health goals. Now, I want to move to the second pillar, which is exercise. And a lot of women think they have to either do 5-7 sessions of exercise a week and do high intensity interval training because that's what is good for your blood sugars, or completely do a marathon or start running. What is the middle for exercise when it comes to finding the best approach, we're talking about someone who maybe doesn't exercise at all, or maybe they have been trying to stay up with a consistent training program, but doesn't seem to be enough. Maybe it's not the right approach. Maybe it's too much. Maybe it's too little. What is the happy medium for that?
Yeah, and again, and you're probably going to get sick of me answering this, but it's going to be individual, all right? And that's going to be like the overarching theme of this. Even if you follow me and I'll make a post about, whatever I make a post about, understand that when I make a post, my post might be seen by 500,000 people. So, that's just to the masses. But in the end, it's finding what works for you. So I feel like, and I've been in the fitness industry, especially for the last, I started training 20 years ago. And I feel like it's definitely changing now, but I feel like always women were told kind of cardio, stick to group classes, and weights are for guys, right? It's definitely changing now. I'm sure you know this. You look in the gym now and it's different. Like there is any weight section of most gyms now, there is as many girls as there are boys now, which is wonderful. But I just feel like, especially if you're slightly older, if you're, 30, 40, 50, 60, you might still be conditioned to think that, weights are for boys and cardio is what I'm supposed to do. Thankfully, we know better now. So with PCOS, and the most common piece of advice for PCOS is to lose weight. And I feel like if you went and asked, 100 random people what exercise is best for losing weight, they're going to say cardio, right? And it's just, again, with PCOS, what you are doing, if your main goal is to improve your PCOS, your main goal is probably to reduce inflammation, to reduce androgens, and to increase your insulin sensitivity. So instead of just being like, I'm just going to go walk on the treadmill or run on a treadmill, what you should be doing, or you could just follow someone who knows what they're talking about, is what exercise is going to help me achieve these things most effectively. So for women with PCOS specifically, the best form of exercise you can do is strength training, lifting weights. Lifting weights helps to increase your insulin sensitivity, which is going to have a downstream effect of decreasing your androgen levels, there's a lot of confusion around that. A lot of women think that if I'm going to start lifting weights, it's going to increase my testosterone. No, that's not true, because you have to understand that women with PCOS have elevated levels of testosterone, majority of them anyway. So what it can do is help it bring it back down to baseline. So strength training is like, if we're talking about nutrition, and if you're only going to set one goal with your nutrition, it's going to be set a protein goal and stick to that. If we're talking about exercise, if there's one thing you can do for exercise, I would say like incorporate strength training 3 times a week, 4 times a week, focus on compound movements. But strength training is going to yield you the greatest results for improving your PCOS. Outside of that is setting a step goal, right? So as I said, I would say the vast majority of people are like deficient in steps. I have found that myself. So if you can set a step goal, and again, if you set your step goal and you find that, and do what I do, like you can buy these step watches for $30 now. Not a great one, but you don't need a great one. I only actually wore this for a week because I just wanted to become aware. Find your current step goal. On our program, some people are coming in and their daily step goals are under 2,000 at the moment. Their daily step count under 2,000, right? So that is highly sedentary. So set a step goal. If it's 2,000, maybe set it for 4,000. And what it just gets you aware. Maybe you're going to go for a walk after work. One of my very first clients when I was still working as a personal trainer, one of the first things we did when we changed her program to make it more PCOS specific was she would get home from work around 4:30. And what she would generally do, because she had kids, was she'd plot around the house, she'd make the bed, she'd get dinner ready. she'd get the kids stuff ready for school the next morning. What we did was a non-negotiable for her was she took a 30-minute walk, right? 30-minute walk. She got about 1,500 to 2,500 steps in, and she took her kids. She took her kids down to the park, and instead of they would play on the play center. Instead of her sitting down watching, she would just walk around. She would constantly walk around. It's only 30 minutes, but what that did for her was it just. Number one is the change it makes in your mindset, and it makes you feel like you're doing something. It makes you feel like you're moving forward. Obviously has great benefits in terms of your mental health and your brain chemistry walking. It also is just a low impact, low barrier to entry form of exercise. But those two things would be like the biggest things. Incorporate some strength training if you can, whether that's at a gym, or if you're not comfortable at a gym or you don't live close to a gym, at home you can buy resistance bands, or you can buy little dumbbells, or you could just use body weight to start with. That's the thing about exercise too, right? Don't think any exercise is bad. It's just there's things on social media now saying that high intensity exercise is bad for PCOS. Strength training is bad for PCOS. The thing is, why are we living in a world now where exercise is bad for you, right? Exercise, all forms of exercise. If you enjoy running, run. If you enjoy kayaking, kayak. If you enjoy going to the gym, do that. If you play a sport, do that. We just understand that, all right, if my main goal in life at the moment is to improve my PCOS, there is just a list of priorities in terms of what exercises are better for me. And they would be walking, strength training, something like Pilates is amazing. And then down would be playing sport, doing endless amounts of cardio would just be at the bottom of that list. But in terms of exercise, if you're looking at just what's going to yield me the best results, strength training with walking.
When you refer to strength training, are we talking about a strength training, meaning power and lower reps, higher weight, or hypertrophy? Or does it matter? Whatever you like the best, or what is going to actually yield the most benefits to increase your muscle mass with hypertrophy training, or with lower weight, lower reps, higher weights to increase your strength?
Yeah, I would say those two things are correlated, but with strength training, your goal is to put on muscle mass, right? Because that's going to have beneficial effects on your insulin sensitivity, on your overall metabolism. So what's the most effective way to build muscle mass? It could be anything. It could be 6 to 20 rep range. But ideally, what's going to work for most and what's going to be enjoyable for most, you're looking at 10 to 15 reps with practicing continual progression, right? So what I did this week or what I did this month, I'm going to try to improve next month, whether that's a little bit more weight, whether that's, more reps, whether that's, probably not more sets because you don't want to be overworking, but continual progression, which just means you're doing a little bit better than you did last time. But practicing hypertrophy, which just means you're prioritizing building muscle, that's going to yield the best results.
Yeah, I think it is interesting because a lot of women don't want to put on muscle.
Yeah.
Like they think, if I start training for hypertrophy, I'm going to become the next Dwayne Johnson. And I don't think that is as easy as people think it is. Yeah, some women with high androgens may have an advantage of putting muscle a little bit faster. And maybe you don't want to go to that extreme either. But I don't think it is either as easy. So if you have this mental barrier and that predisposition of not wanting to do resistance training because as PCOS and higher androgens, you could have a much easier time putting on muscle and you don't want to look that bulky.
Yep.
What can be done instead?
Yeah, and you would know this better than anyone because you look incredible, right? And I would ask you, how easy was it to achieve the body you have right now?
I've been training for 20 years, and over 20 years, I've never been bulky. When you get bulky, when you definitely take something that is not necessarily in your body. So extra stuff,
Yeah.
extra things. I am a natural athlete, and I have struggled so much to put on real muscle now that I'm in a quote unquote building phase, and I have to eat more and I have to do a lot more things. So for women, that is not that easy. It is going to take a long time. What makes you look bulky is when obviously you have a higher percentage of body fat and underneath you have muscle. So you seem to look like you are getting bigger, but it is not right. When you lose some body fat, you realize that you have less muscle than you think you had.
Yeah, 100%. And the thing is, and yeah, what you're referring to, and look at male bodybuilders, right? If they want to bulk up faster, if they want to get bigger and stronger, they will take steroids. And what are most steroids derived from? Androgens, right? So they're increasing their androgen levels, and that allows you to build muscle stronger, faster, easier. So women with PCOS who will naturally have higher androgens than other women will most likely be able to build muscle faster, stronger. Now, their levels of androgens are nothing compared to what men inject. But for some women with PCOS, they definitely do see that they build muscle faster, stronger, easier. And everyone has a different perception of what bulky is. My sister-in-law, she goes to the gym and she thinks she's really bulky. But it's because she has, wide shoulders, a bigger back. So for her, she just feels like, as soon as she starts doing weights, she loses like that look of femininity to her, where really no one else looks at her and thinks that, right? But we're always, how we perceive ourselves. But if you do feel like that, I would still say lift weights, right? That's still ideal, but maybe your intensity is toned down a little bit. Maybe you're not trying to just smash yourself and build as much muscle as possible. Maybe you're looking at slightly higher rep ranges. Maybe your intensity is down a bit. Maybe you're reducing your rest time. So it's really just about, like getting in there and getting it done. Or you could prioritize, Pilates if you enjoy that. You could prioritize walking. You could prioritize other forms of, more cardio-based exercise if you want to. You could look at a sport. But I would say, like, for everyone, and even if we're not talking about PCOS, because we're talking about bone density, we're talking about as you age, we're talking about benefits to your mental health. I would say that everyone should be incorporating strength training. But if you do feel like I don't like the effects of strength training, tone it down.
One thing that I would add though is if you feel like you're bulky in certain areas of your body, just plan around and identify the areas that you are not bulky enough,
Right,
and increase the training volume around those areas so you look more symmetrical and your upper body and your lower body is more proportionate. So if you feel like your shoulders are too wide, your back is too wide, and maybe that's an area that you don't need to add that much volume or that much intensity, just the minimum effective volume for you to just train them and keep them nice and strong.
Yeah.
But train more your lower body. Use more the hypertrophy training and your volume for your glutes. Maybe just develop more of that glute medius, that nice glute shelf, your hamstrings, your quads, and you will have a much more proportionate body. And you're never going to look bulky. You actually, once you develop a more proportionate body, your body looks more feminine, has more shape, and that makes you look more feminine. And training makes you look more feminine when you do it right. Obviously, if you learn how to make your body more proportionate and you get the muscles to get stronger and more defined.
It's so true. Yeah, I love that because, just thinking, I've never heard a girl say, my bum is looking too bulky. That's generally the goal, right? But it's so true. And that's where And it's become so apparent just even in this, that's where like educating yourself becomes so important. Because let's say, let's say you're looking to change your nutrition, but what do you do? Because most people are told just eat less calories, but then that's not like, it's not the most effective thing to do. Same with exercise. Most people are told do cardio, or you might be training with your partner. You're just going to follow what, he or she does. And it might be a lot of upper body. So just knowing, just becoming aware of what the actual goals are and what you just said. Like, all right, if I feel like, my back and my shoulders are too bulky, well, I'm going to prioritize lower body training or, toning up my arms. Like, understanding, what my goals are so important. So it's so important to become aware and educate yourself, because if you don't know these things, it can seem very hopeless.
I agree. Now let's move to the third pillar. We spoke about smart supplementation, and I think that is a big area that you are working on at the moment. You have a company as well that has supplements designed specifically for addressing these particular issues around women with PCOS and some deficiencies. Inositol seems to be one of those that are shine and bright around women with PCOS and quite recommended for a reason. What is good about it?
Inositol in general, so if we're talking about PCOS, inositol is definitely the one supplement that has the most amount of research, the most amount of anecdotal data behind it, but definitely the most amount of research. And there's been some wonderful research in the last 24 months directly comparing it to metformin. So metformin is currently considered the gold standard treatment for PCOS. It's a medication that it's more of a diabetic medication that improves your insulin sensitivity. So it is a prescribed medication, metformin, right? And it's prescribed to many women with PCOS. For many women I know love metformin. It's been life-changing. But for just as many women with PCOS who have been prescribed metformin, the side effects were just too much, right? It creates a lot of issues with diarrhea, nausea, stomach cramping. But the good thing is, so if that's considered the gold standard treatment for PCOS, the wonderful thing is in the last 2 years, there have been some big studies done that have shown that inositol is non-inferior to metformin in most aspects, which is crazy. Metformin prescribed medication, inositol a supplement. So what inositol does is improves your insulin sensitivity. So again, if for the majority of women with PCOS, the underlying root cause here is insulin resistance, if you can find something that improves that, you are going to improve a vast array of your PCOS. And that's what inositol does. Inositol, if you have insulin resistance, can help improve insulin resistance, which is why if you look at what women with PCOS say about inositol, helps improve their menstrual cycle, helps improve ovulation, helps improve energy levels, improves their sleep, improves their anxiety. These are all symptoms of insulin resistance. Doesn't work perfect for everyone, of course. This is what PCOS is. And it's due to the fact that not every woman with PCOS has insulin resistance. So if you don't have insulin resistance, inositol is likely not going to do anything for you. But in terms of, if there is one supplement, again, if we're breaking this down to, all right, I have PCOS, I want to improve it. What is, I don't want to take a million different supplements. What is, one supplement I can take that is most likely going to yield me the best results? Inositol would be the first one you would choose due to the amount of clinical research that is being done on it and due to the fact of just how beneficial it has been. One thing I would do if you do have PCOS is go on Reddit and go on the PCOS forums and just chat to other women with PCOS. Start to read what they're saying. Start to read their experiences. And inositol just comes up again and again. I've ran my supplement company for 7 years now, and inositol by far has, up there in terms of the best amount of feedback. So gold standard in terms of supplements for PCOS, inositol. Myo-inositol is ideal. That's what the most amount of research has been done, although the combination of D-chiro and myo is also just as beneficial. But if there was one supplement you wanted to try if you had PCOS, like inositol would be right up there.
What is a dose and the timing when it comes to really know exactly how much and when?
Yeah, so daily dose for PCOS of 3 to 4 grams, and timing, I would say first thing in the morning, or if you do want to split your dosages up, I would say 2 grams with or before breakfast and 2 grams with lunch is going to yield the best results.
Does it make any difference if you take it at night, or if you forget to take it? What happens if you don't take it on a regular basis, or should you take it every day?
Yeah, definitely take it every day, ideally. In terms of what benefits is it going to be in terms of night, in terms of splitting it up over 2 dosages, in terms of splitting it up over 3 dosages, in terms of having it in the morning? Look, there's never been research to show that. Ideally there would be, but there's never been research to show that. But in terms of what overall benefit is or negative impact, I think it's going to be negligible. So probably ideally, take it when it best suits your schedule. And for most, that is in the morning, right? You get up, you have breakfast, you have your vitamins. So my advice is always just have it in the morning. But if you need to have it in the evening, or if you need to split it up, that's absolutely fine, because in terms of the overall impact that's going to have, I don't think you're going to see a difference, to be honest.
What about berberine? I think that is another one that is very, very popular, and it seems that has very similar effects when it comes to managing blood glucose and insulin resistance. Which one is better, and what's about berberine? What is special about it?
Yes, the berberine rose in popularity probably over the last 2 years. If you go on TikTok, there's just like thousands of videos on berberine. Initially, I still love berberine. The issue with berberine now is how many people are comparing it to like GLP-1 agonists. Like it's nature's Ozempic. No, it's not. Right? It's look, that's ridiculous. All right, don't compare it to GLP-1s. But berberine does very similar things to inositol. I would classify berberine right next to inositol. So, like, should you take both? No, I would take one or the other. Berberine improves insulin sensitivity. Unlike inositol, which is safe while you're pregnant, it is safe while you're breastfeeding. Berberine is not safe while pregnant. It is not safe while breastfeeding, so definitely don't take it then. But very similar in terms of improving insulin sensitivity. There was a study in late 2022 that directly compared myo-inositol to metformin to berberine for outcomes for PCOS. Berberine outperformed both of those for hormonal parameters, and also like weight loss, waist to hip circumference, and waist to hip ratio, and waist circumference. So in terms of should I try inositol or should I try berberine? Understand that they both do very similar things. They're both going to improve insulin resistance. I would try inositol if I'm just looking for one supplement that's probably going to be more well tolerated. If I was looking for more, I want to improve my anxiety, I want to improve sleep, and I want to improve regular ovulation, menstrual cycle, and especially if I want to improve my fertility chances. But I would choose berberine if more of my desire was around weight loss. Berberine is also, there was only a small study from a few years back, but berberine was is still the only supplement that's been shown to specifically reduce visceral body fat, which is interesting. I don't understand the mechanism yet, but that's very interesting. But if my goal was more around, I want help with losing weight, I want help around reducing belly fat, I would choose berberine over inositol for that.
Same question around dosages and timing. Is it something that you should be having with every meal that you use to have carbohydrates, or once a day? And what about dosages? What is the best recommended dosages for berberine?
Yeah, so inositol is very well tolerated, very few side effects, not for all. Some people are obviously going to find side effects, but inositol is very well tolerated. Berberine is well tolerated, but it does create more side effects, right? So I would say berberine should be taken with food to reduce the possibility of side effects. 500 to 1500 milligrams is the ideal dosage. Always start with 500 milligrams because the risk of side effects is slightly higher with berberine. So I would just have 500 milligrams. Berberine generally comes in capsules, and it generally comes in 500 milligram capsules. So I would just have 500 milligram capsule at breakfast. Now, if you're going to increase, if you're going to go from 500 to 1,000 to 1,500 milligrams, I would say ideally split that dosage up between breakfast, lunch, dinner, and that's probably going to be the most effective way to try berberine.
You mentioned side effects. What are the main side effects when you take berberine?
Again, gastrointestinal issues. So we're talking about diarrhea, we're talking about cramping, we're talking about bloating would be by far nauseous. So they would be the most common side effects from berberine.
Would you recommend beyond these two any other supplement that you think is going to be key for women with PCOS? Thinking vitamin D, omega-3s, calcium, magnesium, zinc. Is there anything else that in your mind would be like this is something that is going to yield you quite a lot of benefits?
Yeah, so again, here I go.
Blood test.
Depends on you.
Yep.
Depends on you, depends on your PCOS, depends on your goals. I feel like a lot of women with PCOS they see something online and like, I have to have that. But as I always say, like, you don't need a million different supplements. Supplements should be part of your plan, not the whole plan.
Right.
I just feel like supplements in general, I think people just look at it as like the magic cure. Hopefully I can just do this. You know, I could make a post on, I've made many posts talking about holistic plans, right? Nutrition, exercise, and supplements will be mentioned. And then the comments are like, but what supplement? But what supplement? So understand like supplements are part of the plan. For PCOS specifically, they're like some of them are amazing, but they're part of the plan. Vitamin D. So I always talk about what are like daily essentials for PCOS. Like vitamin D is a daily essential for PCOS. 67 to 85% of women with PCOS are deficient in vitamin D. Vitamin D deficiency is directly correlated with insulin resistance. It also worsens insulin resistance, leads to issues with your sleep. It leads to issues with your mental health, leads to issues with fatigue, leads to issues with your menstrual cycle, ovulation, egg quality, and fertility. So vitamin D is an absolutely daily essential. Now, ideally, you'd be going to your doctor, getting your vitamin D levels checked, because vitamin D isn't as simple as, 500 milligrams. It's going to be slightly different for everyone, but a good starting dose of vitamin D might be about 1,000 IUs. Outside of that, it's going to be, again, goal specific. Something like L-carnitine can be helpful if your goal is more towards weight loss, where something like if your goal is to improve like androgens and improve facial hair specifically, something like zinc and spearmint tea. Spearmint tea is an interesting one where there is very little clinical research about it. But if you go into, the reviews, if you spend any time on Reddit, if you spend any time around just women with PCOS conversating, like spearmint tea is right up there with anecdotal evidence in terms of how much it helps, but the research just isn't there yet. But again, there are 1,000 different supplements for PCOS. It just comes down to, number one, you don't need to take 1,000. And then number two, I understand what my goals are, and then what supplements have been shown to help me get to my goals. For most women, get a daily multi that contains inositol, vitamin D, and magnesium, and then maybe add one or two other supplements that are more targeted towards your specific outcome. But outside of that, unless you're talking to a person on an individual basis, you just can't give a supplement recommendation.
I agree. I think it is super important to think about not overloading with too much and just give you what exactly you need that is going to yield the most benefits. Now, I know we have gone over an hour and I respect your time, so I appreciate you, Drew. There was one more question in the comments that was around creatine and benefits around PCOS. Is there any? And I'd like to close with this question.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never seen any direct research into, taking creatine for PCOS outcomes. Obviously, if you're in the fitness space, if you're looking to, so this is how indirectly it can help improve PCOS, right? So I've never seen any direct research showing that, creatine does X, Y, or Z for PCOS. None. But creatine is well known for its benefits to helping to build lean muscle mass, which, as we spoke about before, for most women with PCOS, one part of your plan should be increasing your lean muscle mass. So if creatine is going to help that become more effective, that's how creatine could indirectly help PCOS. But in terms of putting all your hopes into creatine for PCOS, it's just, it's not one I would recommend. But if you are getting into strength training or just getting into, I want to build a bit of lean muscle, want to start lifting weights, for sure. Like creatine, I don't think there's any, and I'd like to hear your thoughts too. I don't think there's any supplement that has more evidence in terms of helping build lean muscle mass than creatine, is there?
I think the beyond whey protein, creatine has so many benefits beyond just even the physical aspect of it, or the metabolic part of creatine as such. We now get lots of different benefits around your mental health, your cognitive function, heart function, bone health. Like, we have even more research now coming towards lots of different areas, and how even women with PCOS, even more for perimenopausal and menopausal women, would benefit from having these, just to see all the different extra benefits that are beyond just muscle or like aesthetics, if that makes sense.
Amazing. Yeah, it's not something I've really researched into, so I'm learning something. But that's awesome. Something I've taken for years. I've just taken for gym outcomes, but awesome. Yeah, I know. I've seen on social media, it's probably the one supplement I think everyone's in agreement in terms of it helps.
It definitely helps. Just 5 grams a day, every day for the rest of your life. That's it.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Drew, thank you so much for coming and for just dedicating this time for all these beautiful women that turn today and listen to our conversation. Where can people find you, and is there anything that you have coming on for you?
Yeah, so people can find me if you just type into Instagram or TikTok, the PCOS Mentor. I'm there. And in terms of coming up, I'm actually in the middle of writing a book on PCOS, so collating all of my knowledge on PCOS into one resource. So that should be coming out in January of next year. And that's been a really good experience because, obviously I'm really busy these days running both companies. So getting back into writing a book has allowed me to get back into researching myself, and just like you learn things, how you kind of learn things and then you kind of remember them, but you don't truly understand them. So like writing down all of the different topics of PCOS and getting into researching them myself again has been a wonderful experience. But that's the one thing I'm working on and I'm very excited about. So that's coming up in January of next year.
Oh, marvelous. I'm very, very excited to get on my hands on that one. So I wish you all the best. I appreciate you, Drew. This is going to be here in Instagram available to do the rewatch, but I'm also going to put them in YouTube as well. So stay tuned for either or to watch it. And thank you so much, Drew.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye.